at some history from my favorite prosecutor. Yes, I have a favorite prosecutor. You think I hate all attorneys and particularly hate Santa Barbara district attorneys, but there is one prosecutor, ex-prosecutor, who likes history. I'm going to take you to Roger Widener from Oregon. We'll be back in just a few minutes. We're here with Roger Widener, former attorney
and public prosecutor
from Oregon, who's a bit of a history buff, and he likes to study like the banking of the wars and the financing of wars. Roger, what can you tell us about the wars, and when did this financing become critical to keeping wars going?
Well, for the last 400 years, it's been one of the prime sources of profit for the international banking cartels. The international banking system really started in Venice in about 1100 AD. That's when the Venice became controlled by the bankers. They had a doge system. All the rest of the countries around it were kings and czars, but Venice was a completely commercial center. It was the one of the slave capitals of the world. It was the interpole between Europe and India and China. It was down the Red Sea and into India and China. So it was the commercial center of the world. And
they did major slave trading.
That was one. Yes,
that 1100 AD.
Yes, that was slave trading has always been the backbone of the international commerce because it was so profitable. It wasn't just blacks, it was any country that was conquered. That's the people that were conquered were enslaved and sold. That was one of the bounties of any country that would overrun.
Black, white, Indian,
yes,
the Doge bankers in Venice profited from that slave trade.
Immensely.
And then the Crusade came along and they financed the Crusade.
They did, and they because Constantinople, after the fall of Rome, in about 350, 400 AD, it didn't fall over like a building. It fell gradually as they could no longer maintain their borders, and the barbarians started coming in. Rome had been 500,000, 750,000 people. All of a sudden, it went down to 50,000 people, and those families, those commercial families, they went to Constantinople. And when they went to Constantinople in about 350, 400 AD, that's when Constantine made Christianity a state religion. And then it was taken back. Then they started back conquering those barbarians and converting them by the sword to Christianity. So Christianity was a state religion, and it was completely controlled by these countries that they would conquer. The Byzantine Empire, as it expanded, Christianity was its state religion. It was like a communism, and there was no deviation, anything that was heresy to say anything else, and that's how all of Europe was basically conquered.
And how would you define the Doge system? You use the word Doge. Most people are not familiar with that word.
Well, he's like the head of...
Head banker?
Yes, like if the Federal Reserve System was openly acknowledged as running this country, then Bernanke would be the Doge, because he would be the head of the banking system. And the banks, the international bankers, with that banking system, they made all the rules. There was a Senate, but it was all run by money. So money was the preeminent driving force, and the commerce, it was all based on commerce. Venice had some 120 colonies around the Mediterranean from 1200 on, and how they became preeminent during the Crusades. Seljuks had overrun the Holy Lands. Then they had all of in France, and they would be enlisting people to go on these crusades. And the Doge, Dandolo, he took all these mercenary crusaders and told them that they were going to take back the Holy Lands, and they instead went to Constantinople and sacked Constantinople, which was the Christian center of and in fact in Venice they had there's some of the...
Let me interrupt. Why did they want Constantinople sacked?
Because,
why did the Doge want the Crusaders to sack Constantinople?
Because then they became, the financial interest in Venice became preeminent.
Then they had no opposition.
Yes.
That
yeah.
was the last segment of the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Constantinople. Rome had already fallen.
Yes.
About 450 or 460
Yes.
AD.
And then
in what, 1100?
and 1100, that was the sacking of Constantinople. Now Constantinople continued for the Byzantine Empire continued in a weakened state for another couple hundred years, but it was effectively, it was over for them as being the preeminent power after they were sacked by Constantinople, and Constantinople then took over all of its colonies and its commercial activity. Everything,
Wait, you said after Constantinople was sacked by Constantinople. You meant after Constantinople was sacked by the Crusaders with financing from the Venetian Doge.
yes,
Whose
from
name was Don
Dandolo.
Dandolo, the Doge,
In about
basically
1200.
the central banker of Venice,
Yes.
the head central banker, financed the Crusaders,
Yes.
who were on their way to Jerusalem, and they get defected and they go to Constantinople and sack the place.
Right. Now you were in the military, I was in the military. You know how much knowledge the troops have about where they're being sent. They just do what they're told to do, and that was the same thing here. And the level then, they were basically almost barbarians that went in and did this. But from 1200 on, then for the next 250, 300 years, Venice was the preeminent commercial power of the world because it had controlled all of this trade between Europe and India and China. Europe was not the major commercial centers. China and India at that time were the major commercial centers of the world. But when and they continued to expand until the Ottomans in about 1450 overran and cut off their access to the Red Sea. So then the commerce had to go out and around through the Gibraltar and around Africa. And that's when Columbus, looking for a trade route to India and China, discovered the New World, North and South America. And so that then, this commercial center in Venice, it moved around to Amsterdam and into Holland, and those, what they call the Low Countries there. But it was the Low Countries, they were subject to invasion by Spain and by France and by Germany. And so they ultimately, the bankers were able to move into England. They had been excluded for 1200 AD, and they were excluded until Cromwell was brought in and to overthrow the royalty in England in 1650.
Thomas Cromwell, sometimes described as a man for all seasons.
This is Lord Cromwell. He was they call it was the so-called Protestant movement against the church and the state. Yes, that ruled all nobility, and so when Edward VIII, he, for political reasons, created the Church of England, but it was still it was a church and state controlling all, and that was not what the bankers wanted to do. So the bankers financed Cromwell from Holland to overthrow he overthrew Charles.